Welcome, everybody. I'm Roberto Alvarez. I'm the Executive Director of the GFCC, the Global Federation of Competitive Risk Councils. If you are joining this for the first time today during the summit, please check more about the GFCC. We are a global membership, multi-stakeholder organization with a footprint in 30 countries. Our 2021 Global Innovation Summit, it's organized around 5 future-defining topics: innovation, sustainability, resilience, inclusiveness, and partnership. And we have launched earlier today a GFCC Frame the Future report that addresses those 5 imperatives. The sessions were organized around those 5 themes too. And this is because of that we're talking sustainability in a few minutes. For sustainability, our Frame the Future report highlights 2 goals: put a price on carbon and triple the investment in research and development for new clean technologies. I cannot imagine about a better group of people to talk about future sustainability than the one that we have here today. And I'll briefly introduce our panelists and the moderator to all of you. Moderating the session, we have GFCC Chairman Chad Holliday. Chad is a sustainability champion. He used to be the Chairman and CEO of DuPont. He then became the Chairman of Bank of America, and more recently, until a few months ago, he was the Chair of the Board of Royal Dutch Shell. In addition to being the Chairman of the GFCC, Chad is the Chair Emeritus of the Council on Competitiveness, our founding member and partner for this session. Joining us from the UK, we have Bob Barbour. Bob is the Director and Chief Executive for the Centre of Competitiveness in the UK that has been working with companies on the ground to drive productivity growth. An important part of that agenda is about new technologies and new energy, smart grids, renewables. From California, we have Elisa Jaggerson. Elisa is a venture capitalist. She is the managing partner for Wildcat Venture Partners. If you ever went to an Apple store, that's her fault. Previously, Elisa was the founder and CEO of a design company that worked with Apple and Steve Jobs to create and deploy all Apple stores around the globe. From KL, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, we have Mohammed Ibrahim Abdul Muttalib. Ibrahim has taken part in the design, implementation, and is now the president of University Technology Petronas that's linked to the main energy company in Malaysia, Petronas. From the Washington, D.C. area, we have Rogeri Studer. Rogeri used to be a board member of the World Bank, has been working, it's a GFCC Distinguished Fellow, and has been working on sustainability issues around the globe. And from Sierra Leone, we have Kandee Ian Keller. Kandee was the Director General for the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. He was the co-founder and co-chair of the United Nations Sustainable Energy for All, and plays a variety of roles around the globe in sustainable development, in addition to being a member of the parliament in Sierra Leone. We have a quick vignette, and then we turn the floor to the moderator. Ladies, gentlemen, thank you so much. Chad, the floor is yours. We are delighted and honored to have you, not just chairing the GFCC, but moderating the session.
Chad, it's with you.
I'm Chad Holliday, and it's an honor to chair a fantastic panel that I think you're going to find one of the most exciting panels you've heard all day. And we're talking about sustainability. We talk about what's really critical for our future. Let me put a few things in perspective before we get started. Sustainability is much more than just climate change. So climate change is critical. It's important. We must do something about it. But we must use all the Earth's resources in a sustainable way that we can propel our society for a long time to come. 37% of waste goes into landfills today globally. 37%. You can't be recycling those materials. They're lost forever if they go into a landfill. And the projection is that's going to increase by 70% and 30 years from now. It's just going to be impossible for us to keep living, taking up the resources that we are in the manner we are. I think we all know that. You wouldn't be on this, listening to this panel today if you didn't see it to be true. And I think the way we solve the climate change issue, which is a great extent the energy system, has to take into account all these other environmental factors that are so important as we go forward. I was served on the board of Shell for 10 years. And during my time there, I took up a little bit of history lessons in the changes the energy systems have seen. And let me just give you a small glimpse into that, because I think it will be helpful as we think about how to change the energy system and how to do it in a sustainable way for all the resources. There have been multiple energy systems transitions over time. Just depends on how far you want to go back to how many you count. Let me just go back to one that occurred in 1850 when the kerosene lantern in its current form was invented. And we had much better indoor lighting with a kerosene lantern than we had by other oil lamps or candles or things that have been used in the past. But only 25 years after that, the light bulb was invented. Now, the transition from a kerosene lighting in your home to a light bulb was as big a transition as you could imagine. You couldn't use any of the existing infrastructure of kerosene. You had to put a much more expensive total system in your house. Yet you got better light. It was brighter light. You could light more than you could before. And flash forward just 50 years after that, looking just at the US, half of the US homes had electricity in their house. They'd moved away from kerosene and they had electricity. Half of the US homes in 50 years, phenomenal. Why did that happen? It was a better energy system for the user. Was it lower cost? No, it wasn't lower cost. If you look at the total systems cost, it was quite a bit higher cost. But it provided them more value, and it had the promise of many more things in the future. I would suggest to you the energy systems we will go to now need to have those same characteristics. That they need to bring more value to the user and have a hope for a systems improvement longer term. And our two recommendations here that we have some kind of a cost on carbon, which is necessary to properly reflect the cost of the current system, and triple down on research are very critical to making those things happen. So I leave with you on the energy system, think about a better system for the user, not just lower cost. My guess is it will be a little higher cost, but it will have more total value and reliability to people going forward. With that, let me start with our panel. And Bob, would you like to kick us off? You're on mute, Bob.
That's it. I'm muted. Let me say, first of all, thank you to GFCC for the opportunity just to address you this evening and take part in this discussion. My name is Bob Barber. I'm the Chief Executive of the Centre for Competitiveness in Northern Ireland. We're a private sector, not-for-profit, independent membership organisation. We actively support the development of an international competitive economy through innovation, productivity improvement, and quality excellence. We've been at this probably since 1990. Our economy here is based on small and medium-sized enterprises, and we do administer an all-island collaborative energy cluster that's called Smart Grid Ireland. And it's made up of utilities, Electricity Networks, Corporate Industry and Sustainable Energy Authority in Ireland. And our purpose, of course, in that cluster is to contribute to the deployment of a highly decarbonised electricity grid on the island of Ireland by 2030 that meets the national policy targets. So on the subject of addressing future sustainability, many of our large, I think, international companies are already engaged in some measure in addressing environmental and social engagement and governance issues on sustainability. But I think these are generally not filtered down through the supply chain. Sure, we have isolated projects such as organic food, renewable energy, gardening, transport, clean water, and so on. But I'm not sure, with the exception of energy, that a lot of work has been seen in the context of reducing the carbon footprint. Whereas the carbon footprint measures, of course, as you know, the total greenhouse gas emissions caused directly and indirectly by people, organizations, events, and products. So if I look at the overall economic picture from where I live, the move to a more sustainable economy is a vital strategic move for business of all shapes, sizes in the UK and in Ireland. Let me say there's an ever increasing pressure to reduce farming and commerce and so on. And I noted down for myself some challenges for business going forward, and hopefully we can maybe address some of these. But the first one, I think, in terms of the need in the general for business and the smaller business, is a need for a mind shift that actually moves them where they have been to where they've got to go. And so therefore there's a human dimension involved here. And I think there's a real opportunity here for human resources within companies to focus on the translation of that mindset to where they've been to where they're going. There's also, as Chad mentioned, I think business model changes. We'll be looking at pricing value based on value, or pricing, based on value, selling the eco benefits, if you like. There'll be optimizing of technology, the ecosystem, partnering, long-term supply chains. I mean, transparency and resilience. We're looking at the moment at digital twins to bring in much more transparency in the supply chain, because small companies generally supplying the tier ones don't think about some of these things. They're looking at cutting cost, clearly, but in terms of supply, they've got to look at, review their business in its totality. And as Chad mentioned, waste reduction is a major cost on society. Another area that we're pushing with our companies is a circular economy, looking at what you're doing with what your waste is. Can you recycle it? And of course, there's a whole issue of when you sell something, is the issue of total ownership. And then, of course, carbon pricing will be another legislative factor, which is going to come in to focus very much so. Probably we're in Ireland a little bit, which part of Ireland? The north of Ireland, we're a little bit behind in some of the stuff. In the Republic of Ireland, they have the climate change plan, which is very comprehensive, and certainly it's tied very much into the European Union and the United Nations change platform for improving your sustainability within not only the companies, but within the corporations and the companies in general. But there's a big move at the moment, and I think we've all got behind COP26, and certainly that has made a significant move on people's thinking around what they have to do in the future and the investments they'll have to make, because government can't afford all these changes. So I think business will have to come into play here to address the cost issue, because the cost issue will be quite substantial. So that's really all I want to say at this stage, and I'll hand it back to Chad.
Hey, Bob, thanks very much. Great way to set the stage for us. Let's move now to Kandee in Sierra Leone. Kandee's having a little bandwidth problem, so he might leave his camera off. Kandee, take it away, please. I think we might have lost Kandee with his bandwidth problems. Lisa, are you ready to go? Could you take it at this point?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, it's a nice segue, Bob. I get to be on this panel and certainly grateful to do so and be here. Thank you. The representing sort of that middle of the bell, the focus on innovation, the sector that is the sector that allows us to,
Yes.
sorry.
Kandee, wait, we went to Lisa. You'll be up next.
Just focusing on basically the profitable aspects of the energy transition. So I'm in venture capital, investing only in new technology, new platforms, heavily focused on, in my case, software and AI solutions that enable deep technologies to penetrate sectors and new markets. But it's a really interesting point you make, Bob, about the burden that the government can only bear so much. Existing businesses can only bear so much. One aspect of the solution is these innovative new technologies, many of which are just new delivery mechanisms or new enablement mechanisms for existing technology. There's actually quite a bit of research that shows we don't really need much new tech. We just need to penetrate different verticals and markets and deep into marine and transportation and deep into the energy transition, the grid and whatnot. And really, we aren't sitting here waiting for new technology to save the day. We actually have what we need to get it done. So just backing up by way of introduction, I come to the conversation from having before becoming an investor, a climate technology investor, I've been both a policymaker in the US and an entrepreneur. And had the privilege of sort of coming at this, but after the last 10 years, getting to see lots of different technology. I ran an innovation firm and got to see tremendous amount of both deep tech, new science, and sort of delivery enablement platforms that allowed some pretty exciting shifts to occur. And what I wanted to do with my bit of time here is just sort of walk people through some of these big shifts that are occurring and what we're seeing moving forward. So one big shift, and I so appreciate what you said, Chad, about the solutions may end up being more expensive, but there's been one big shift that has occurred recently, and people often compare this climate tech wave of investment, and we'll talk about how much that is. It's quite a bit right now, but there was a clean tech wave about 10 years ago, and there's a comparison. And one of the big differences, and the clean tech wave was not a success, or it's a TBD. But this climate tech wave, and one of the ways people differentiate it is that the cost of renewable energy in the US is now cheaper than fossil fuels. That's a big difference. The curve finally shifted over. 75% of the global GDP has net zero commitments. That's a big difference. The tech maturity is quite substantial. So the enabling technology, the AI, the machine learning, the robotics, the advanced manufacturing, IoT, those have matured substantially in just the last few years, such that they can be deployed both at an enterprise horizontal level, but in more sophisticated and thoughtful ways into deep domains, into sort of legacy, so to speak. There's also an unbelievable talent supply surge that we're seeing. Just to use a data point of MIT, the last number I heard is that 72% of the artificial intelligence concentrators, so majors in AI, out of MIT, 72% said that they wanted to work on climate. That is a big pipeline for entrepreneurial innovation moving forward. And then finally, the capital stack has deepened significantly and broadened, such that we're now talking about, in 2020, there's $500 billion committed to the energy transition. Now, mind you, to meet our climate goals, Bloomberg has estimated that we'd need 3.1 to 5.8, maybe we're hearing some estimates as much as 7 trillion committed. But we are seeing, we're at 30 billion year to date invested, deployed into climate technology companies from venture. That's a doubling in the last 2 or 3 years and a 30x in the last 10 years. So we're just seeing a tremendous amount of investment go into the space. There's follow-on capital, there's talent, there's tech maturity to enable it, and the fundamental renewable energies have become more cost-effective than fossil fuels. So the big picture is very, very promising. And I'll, just to where I think the question I often get is, okay, great. How could I make tons of money and feel really good about what I'm doing? Is there a sector? And there's quite a few because of this sort of 6x amplification that exists in terms of what's being invested now and what's needed. And then the demand that isn't, the demand has not been met with this 75% of the GDP being committed to net zero. That demand is going to have to be met, and forests are going to have to turn into sequestering environments, and new technologies are going to be invented and whatnot. But along the way, right now, there's a couple trends that are interesting that are worth sharing, and that really sort of are the centerpiece of my focus. One is the sophistication in the industry is emerging. So there's always arbitrage when that's happening. There's deep technology understanding, and there's lots of software sophistication. Those two worlds aren't particularly savvy on each other's demands yet. There is deep tech is starting to make its way into these legacy sectors, agriculture, heavy transportation, and whatnot. But software has not. The enabling platforms have not. So there's some really interesting opportunities there. And then, of course, there's the sort of how do you get these sectors to adopt change? And there's some really interesting science on behavior design and technology adoption that's starting to penetrate some of these new legacy markets. So there's just a lot of really interesting things happening that make it possible for, and this is kind of the case I'd like to make, for a lot of people to make a lot of money in this transition. And I warned everybody I was going to play the role of the unapologetic capitalist. That's not a role I play in real life, but I constantly feel that the world needs to realize that while I think about it as a bell, there's things that we must do that aren't profitable because they are the right thing to do. Defending human rights, for example, may or may not be a profitable activity. We do it because we must. Over here on the bell, on the right side, there are things we do because we can. Increasing the quality of life for elderly people. Back when we lived in caves and the snows came, we had to leave. But now we don't. So we do things, they aren't profitable, but they're the right thing to do, and we do them because we can. There is this big chunk of the bell, and we're going to do that in sustainability. But the big chunk of the bell is where you can actually make a ton of money driving this transition. I want people to get their heads around that a little bit, just because it doesn't have to be philanthropic. It doesn't have to leverage government subsidy. It doesn't have to leverage regulations. It can actually just leverage the markets as they are. Hopefully, you can do that badly and you can do that well, but the markets as they are, and the more people make a lot of money at this, the more sustainable, to use the word in another context, the more sustainable that aspect of the endeavor is. I don't want it to shadow either of the other tails on the histogram. They're critically important, but there is, I'm here to sort of emphasize that middle part of the bell.
Hey, that's great. You're so enthusiastic. Have you always been enthusiastic about this change, or did something happen to really move you at one point in time?
It really is this. I know this. It's the talent that we're seeing. The renewable overtake in terms of cost, I thought that was inevitable. I knew that the tech would mature. The talent, the interest, and the next generation, I am ready to hand the reins over. I know a lot of people of our age like to point out what's difficult about the younger generations, but I gotta tell you, they're nailing it, and they're motivated, and they won't tolerate a lot of the choices we're making. So they're behind a lot of these commitments that large corporations are both wanting to make and having to make.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. Kandee Ian Keller, we don't see your picture, but if you can hear us, go ahead and start your comments, please.
I can hear you well. Thank you very much.
Great.
Well, I share our colleagues' enthusiasm and lots of money to be made and lots of innovation. I just hope that the process will be inclusive. I think we have to put in context that indeed, if climate change is the biggest risk factor we face now for global prosperity, we have to think about those who are already suffering through that climate change, and it's those of us in the global south. But with all the enthusiasm I have heard, we have to take note that there could be significant resource constraints that could bring this energy revolution, energy transition to a halt. And what am I talking about? Very recently, back in May this year, the International Energy Agency has started alerting all of us with good research that in fact some of the key minerals we're going to need to power this energy transition, green energy transition, a lot of those resources, mineral resources, are concentrated in a few countries. Lithium, cobalt, platinum group of metals, manganese, and so on, bauxite. A lot of those are concentrated in a handful of countries. They've even given some, and including rare earth metals, especially for the smart grids. And when we look at Africa in particular, remember, we Africans over the last 300 years have really financed through natural resources the Industrial Revolution. For the green energy revolution as well, cobalt, about 45% of the cobalt is concentrated in the Democratic Republic of Congo. 70% of the platinum group of metals is in Southern Africa. Significant deposits of bauxite are again within the African continent that we're going to need, and the copper for the transmission lines to create this new energy internet. But also the rare earth metals between China, ourselves in Africa, and a few other countries. Maybe 60, 70% of the rare earth metals we need for the smart grids, smartphones, all the innovations in IT that will power this AI revolution are concentrated in this handful of countries. So I guess the key point I want to make it, let the prosperity spread. Let us share knowledge so that the other 4 or 5 billion people share the prosperity in the new revolution that we are experiencing now. But also we should talk about climate justice, because it is a fact that most of us in the global south who have contributed least to the lack of sustainability and to climate change, we suffer already because of climate change. And so this is why we want to talk about climate justice. We want prosperity to spread. We also want global security. When nations fail, there's insecurity for all. When pandemics hit, those poorer countries cannot cope. But again, as we always say, if everybody is not safe, nobody is safe. And pandemics will be part of our future. So the innovation will not only be shared in the energy systems, we also have to look at this energy health nexus. How do we deliver efficient, effective health service systems that will be powered by clean energy, but also that are accessible by all? So that nexus is important, energy health, but also energy health prosperity for especially the poorer countries, to make all of us safe in this context of not only climate change, but a world that is going to be beset by continuous episodes of pandemics. Over to you, sir.
Kandee, thank you so much. That was such an important message to share. Could I get you to comment just a bit more about how COVID-19 is going in Sierra Leone? And is there anything we could learn from that in this sustainability transition?
Well, I think that Sierra Leone and a number of African countries need to be studied for some reason. And even today, there was another article out trying to analyze how come our death rates are so low. I'm not counting Southern Africa, but for the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, in Sierra Leone, we have very low infection rates. So far, of course, we're not testing enough. But what we know is death rates, if people are dying, we will know, because we've experienced Ebola before. We were the worst hit by the Ebola epidemic. So we know when people die. The fact is, very few people are hospitalized in our countries, very few, not even in the hundreds. In our case, in Sierra Leone, of all the infections we had that were hospitalized, still less than 200. So there's something about our immunity that needs to be studied. How come, even if we are not testing, some claim that they've done a serum survey together with Harvard University, that maybe 30% of the population is infected. Did we achieve herd immunity already? Or is there some relationship with the other infectious diseases, malaria and others that we've had that are giving us this resistance. So maybe there's something there to study, Chad. But the fact is the death rates in Africa that all the models presented last year, World Bank had some very tough scenarios, and other universities that will see millions of people on the streets of Africa dead. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened.
Thank you so much.
So there's something good happening.
That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing it. It's good news. We really hope it continues. That's really good to hear. Rogerio, you're up, please.
Thank you, Chad. And first of all, thank you for the invitation for this conversation here. I usually like panels that I learn a lot from what is being said, and I'm liking this conversation very, very much. So, and I don't even know where to start, because some of the issues that have been raised I wanted to raise. Let me introduce myself a little bit. I am an economist by training, guilty, and a finance expert. I had a long career in the multilateral banking system, and I decided to reinvent myself into the issue of sustainability. Now I work in a think tank. I used to work at Brookings. I work now on one think tank that thinks about, the opportunities and benefits of transitioning to low carbon economy. How that can be achieved, and what are the benefits for that? And of course, I'm a proud distinguished fellow of the GFCC. Now, having said that, I wanted to give a little bit of that background to say that I am also optimistic, but I would say with some caveats. I do, as I said, I'm a finance expert, and I have been looking at the issue of innovation that can be used for this transition in a practical manner. And I can say that trends when it comes to finance and innovation are the ones that Lisa has described. It's very clear, but also what Bob has said, it's very clear that we have the capacities in terms of mobilizing resources and put innovation to work to make this transition happen, not only reducing climate change, but making it inclusive, which is what Kandee said, and it's really important. It's really important, not just because it's a more imperative, but because it makes the transition sustainable from a political point of view. So if you look at the three pillars of what is required, you need innovations, you need finance, and of course you need political will. You need political commitment. When I say political, I'm not just talking about governments. That is an important thing, but all citizens, of all the civil society, and that includes the industry. That is a little bit more complicated. So what I would just want to make the point that the trends in terms of innovation and finance are good, and we can talk for a long time about those trends. The trend in terms of getting the parties together is showing more complicated, and we saw that coming out from Glasgow. And therefore, because we cannot get our act together, the speed of the acceleration of climate change, which is already impacting not only the global south, mostly because of the vulnerability, but also the global north, if we want to use this expression, tremendously. I mean, we're creating a society that is divided between those who can be resilient to situations like the pandemic, but also to the effects of climate change, both in the south, but most importantly in the south, because the capacity to respond to that is very low, and in the global north. And why is the political issue so complicated? Because there's a misalignment between what I call public interest and private interest when it comes to bringing the solution. The public interest for everyone, for the global society, is of course making the transition as fast as we can, avoiding climate change, doing that through investments that lead to better jobs, to inclusion, and so on. The private interest is a little bit different because we do not perceive, we as societies cannot perceive the speed of the change, and we cannot promote a change in the behavior of governments in terms of regulations and policies and of the industry that is required to promote, to deal with the emergency. So if we look, for instance, at the largest emitters here in the 10 ones, the first one, of course, is China, the United States. Then you have the EU, India, and Russia, Japan, Brazil, Indonesia, Iran, and Canada. All of them, the major part of the emission comes from production of energy, but it varies a little bit so much. In Brazil, it has to do with land management and agriculture. But if we look at all these key stakeholders, they all have public interests that are perceived different from each other. For instance, China is still claiming that it can accelerate the process, but it has to go slower than required because they are developing countries. The same thing with India. Now, the United States finally managed to get consensus and understand what Lisa was saying, that it's by making green investments and by using green technology, it can advance itself, but it can produce inclusion and it can produce better jobs for the future. So I think, and I don't want to, because I think that there's a deadlock in terms of the political motivation to do that. I want to be optimistic. I want to be an optimistic point. I think that the pressure is increasing, both from the civil society and from industry themselves, for different reasons. So industry, of course, has leaderships that are concerned about the future, of course, like we all citizens here. And but the industry, both the financial and non-financial one, is changing rapidly because, as Bob noticed, the climate change is impacting the performance. So that diversifying both finance and investment towards sustainable investment. And this is creating a huge amount of capacity to invest in the transition. In this global civil society is the young people. The young people that have a lot at stake are saying, we are not taking this anymore. This is creating whole movements that are moving governments to accelerate the regulations, the approach to trade, the approach to investments. And I think this is going to change. So I am optimistic, but at the same time, I'm a little bit concerned that we may go not with the pace and intensity that we need to address the climate emergency. I trust the young people. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Oh, great summary. I'm really glad you stressed the young people, because I think they are our hope. They're going to have to push us to the speed we have to get to. Mohammed, you're up. Wrap up the first round, please.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chad. I would like to take this opportunity to thank GFCC for giving me this opportunity to participate as one of the panel speakers. And I would like to also thank the whole lot of the panel speakers. I guess I have the benefit of being the last to actually first hear the whole lot of the opinion, right? And also, I will not have to put too much then, Chad, because the whole thing is already on the table. I sense there's a kind of a mixed feeling. Generally, it's confidence is there in terms of going forward with this the sustainability agenda. But of course, there are some concern being highlighted as some of the panel speakers were talking about inclusivity. I sense the excitement from Lisa, but I guess Lisa, it might not be the same if you were to go to a different country altogether, right? But I agree, as some of the speakers were saying, I think Roger was saying about the raise up in terms of inclusivity. This is where I guess the part where I can come in the sense that because I'm a university professor and also an engineer. This is where R&D and education would come in. I think education in particular, we have to, as the speed of which we have to do that transition, it's significant. It's very significant. I guess Chad was earlier saying the transition from a kerosene oil to electricity takes about 50 years or so. But I think the transition that we are looking at, moving from fossil fuels to renewables, has to take place. in the order of about 10 to 20 years. Yeah, or else we will not be able to curb the 2 degrees temperature rise target that have been set. Yeah? And I think education has a lot to play here. Yeah, because this is where we could help to sort of raise up the particularly in the developing, in the poorer country, because we need to raise up the awareness and the technical know-how of these people in order for them to buy in, to buy in as well as to act towards getting this renewable, to step in this renewable implementation, to cover the fossil fuel. I forgot to sort of give an introduction. I am Muhammad Ibrahim from UTP. I'm currently the Vice Chancellor. UTP is a private university owned by Petronas, which is the national oil company. And I think Petronas has made it public, or to a certain extent, their commitment. And also similar to Malaysia, we are committed to go to net zero by 2050. Yeah. And that is quite a significant target by our standard Malaysia, because we have to do a lot of transitioning in moving from the current hydrocarbon, which actually powered something like 70 to 80% of our energy, to probably lesser than 50 or 40%, in the next 10 to 20 years. And that is quite a significant. And given that we are also joining the band of trying to develop technology, and when I say technology here, when we talk about the target of reducing the emission, we are talking about from the angle of the supply side as well as the demand side. When we attack the supply side, yes, we can do that transition with all the technology, and particularly if the inclusivity is allowed to actually happen around the world, the technology is being passed on, and there's a financial muscle that will allow us to actually implement it, then the transition can be done by virtue of applying those technology, the renewable technology, to supersede the fossil fuel technology. But there's another angle to it. I think I'm not sure. Lisa can probably give her comment. Now, the technology of actually removing CO2, the emission gases from the environment, I think we haven't got to the point of actually doing that well. Yes, we do the sequestration, but that is still, the way I look at it, it's still limited as opposed to the amount of CO2 that we are pushing into the environment. And another thing is CO2, the technology of actually converting CO2, utilize CO2 into something else. I think if we can do a breakthrough there, that would give a very significant impetus to this move towards renewable energy, because it will also help us to tackle the CO2 emission. Now, on the demand side, I'm looking at from the angle of, this is where education has a lot to do, because I think one or two of the panel speakers was talking about, even Chet was highlighting the way the people are actually behaving. I think we have to change our behavior. Wastage, for example, we've got to strive for reducing the culture of wastage, right? Lifestyle, I think we have to move over to a lifestyle that promote a lot more sustainable practices, rather than keep demanding for good lifestyle that demands a lot of energy. And as a whole, if we can do an education program that can actually raise the awareness and actually educate the people to, in general, change their lifestyle, that and also to help industry to become a lot more efficient, hopefully this, in a way, can reduce the demand side. So as we tackle the supply side, we can also try to tackle the demand side with the hope that we can meet somewhere that is reasonable for us to move along. And this will help us in the transition, to make the transition smoother and better. Back to you, Chad.
Great perspective. So some questions are coming up in the chat about government. So let me put it in perspective, and then Lisa, if you could maybe speak to it first. The question is, what can we do to get governments to move faster? And well, the perspective I'd like to give, Shell has a simulation program they run to solve the climate problem in about 3 hours. And we have about 20 people play the different roles. So the producer of the power, the provider of the energy to the power company, the consumer, the NGO, and the government. And so in the course of this 3-hour event, everybody gets to play every one of those different roles. And when you leave that, and that was my experience and others, the government has the hardest job. Everybody else has a singular focus. For-profit business knows what they have to do. Yeah, an NGO knows what they have, but government has it tough. So without trying to give government a way out, they have a tough job. So Lisa, how can we take that enthusiasm from the private sector and apply it to governments?
It's a big question. If I pull off answering that for everybody today, then we're done.
We're done. We can quit early.
Sorry. So, you know, I'll start with a couple context setting points and then build off. One is perhaps the second hardest job would be an organization like Shell, for example, that has an entire infrastructure and asset base built on one ecosystem that it has to look forward and make a big leap into another ecosystem. And I would argue that it's a push and pull, and probably wasn't going to happen until a bunch of things stacked up, including energy transition pricing, including you know, it's one thing to say, I guess I shouldn't do this anymore, but what can I do? And can that thing be profitable? And can it drive the, so I would argue that governments with that same lens are actually asking very similar questions. They're big, complicated beasts trying to figure out, to use the umbrella organization for today, from a national competitiveness and landscape, as an organism as a nation, I'm trying to optimize my future competitiveness / profitability, to use really crass vernacular. And so just to sort of make that parallel, one of the ingredients would be the movement, the will of the people. The demand in business parlance is this thing that we've all referenced in one way or another, which is the youth. Movement building is actually, when you think about, so for example, a carbon tax, everybody kind of gets that the way the externality gets priced into the ecosystem is through a carbon tax of one form or another. We have watched false starts, we have watched riots, we have watched great countries try and pass them and then have to step back because people took to the streets. I mean, this is fraught. And what is with challenge, and one of the things that is starting to shift is the demand from youth, and so basically the beginning of what I'd call a movement. There is science on movement building. It has to do with, and I'll go ahead and make a big old leap into, it has to do with truth in media and functioning democracies. So if I had to make a bet on anything, it would be high functioning democracies leveraging well-regulated capitalism with sophisticated media systems. That would be it's a big ask, but that's the fundamental ingredient to the ecosystem or the company of a nation being able to say, that's the demand. That would deliver the demand side that then nations could use. That's sort of, it's an abstract swag at my answer. It's essentially movement building.
Well, that's fantastic. That's a movement. But Jerry, you want to get in here? You got the answer. Go ahead.
I don't have the answer, but I want you to add to what Lisa has said by saying that finance can also do a lot to help governments. And I'll explain to you. I had the privilege to represent 8 countries at the board of the World Bank for many years in the Inter-American Development Bank, and from Haiti to all the way to Brazil. Very complex things, but it's one thing that was common. Whenever a mayor or governor or president was elected, they would come to my office and say, we have this list of projects. They are good projects. We want to finance them. And it was a laundry list of projects. We had it was not updated in terms of technology and did not have the finance. Nowadays, a lot of developing countries would like to do a just transition, but they have very little capacity to room or maneuver in terms of fiscal space, but also they do not have the tools to access the funding necessary for the investments, for the pipelines that they can create. So having access to technology, industry providing access to technology for to create the pipelines of projects, but also there's creating structures that you can make the bridge between those pipelines and funders, specialized funders that can have access to that can provide access to finance is essential. And I am saying that because I've been working on two things, and I'll close on this, on two funds. One for the Amazon, for the state of Pará, which exactly created this capacity as a catalytic fund that helps design good projects, but also creates instruments that allows to make good projects in investment-ready projects. And also, we are making a catalytic fund for water resilience in Africa's in city. If that is complicated to make, I can see that it's also possible to make. So bringing your expertise, the finance expertise in industry to provide these platforms and to provide access to finance and technology would be a great way to help those governments.
No, great ad, really very helpful. We only have a couple minutes left. Bob, could I go to you for a minute for anything else to add?
We major in Ireland on wind, as you probably know, and hydrogen. When you look at the energy mix, I mean, in terms of where we have been in investment, there's been a lot of investment gone into the whole area of renewables. I mean, Ireland was the main source back in the 21 turbines in 1992. So it gives you an idea, with a capacity then of 6.5 megawatt. And then today it's about 744 megawatt. And it's producing up to a maximum of 40% of renewable energy to the grid. The problem is the grid can't take it. And we have problems. One of the plans in place is to go offshore, invest offshore. So we're pretty well advanced in terms of the energy transition. At the supply side, where we're weak and have to develop a lot is on the consumer side. And we think on microgrids and such things, the technology is that. But we're looking at the offshore at the moment, putting in 5,000 megawatt, which is about 7 times, quite a lot.
It's really important. And I really see your point on hydrogen too. With hydrogen could be the way you store that to make it work.
Yeah.
Before we run out of time, let me go to Mohammed. Anything else to add?
Yes, Chad. I think looking at this in general, there's a different scenario, a disparity in terms of the level of education and awareness that is being displayed in the developed nation as compared to the developing and particularly the poorer nations. I think this is an issue that we need to address it together, given that global warming is not a local problem. It is a global problem. The same thing, if I can quote a simple example as the coronavirus, the issue of vaccine, right? Now, the vaccine is sort of tied up or being supplied mainly to the developed countries, to the rich nation per se, and the poorer nation was sort of spared from it. Yeah. But the problem is because we are so interconnected. Yeah. So any problem that continue to be faced at the poorer nation will ultimately get back into the richer nation or the developed countries if we don't actually help each other to tackle it as a whole. And I think COVID-19 gave us one good example, and I think the same thing will happen to these emission problems, right? To the sustainability, if the technology that the rich nation has not been properly sort of shared with the poorer nation, and most importantly, making it affordable. I agree with Lisa. Probably in US, that situation has happened. Renewable has probably overtaken the fossil fuel, but in developing countries, it's different, especially in the country where you are producing the oil, right? And there's a lot. Again, the political versus the people's will. I rest my case at that chat. I think it's something that
Thank you.
good for us all to think together.
Very helpful. So Kandee, we're going to go to you for the last word. Kandee, you have been spending decades of your life trying to make this equation work, reducing greenhouse gases, but doing it in a way that the people of developing countries could really advance. Kandee, if you had one wish that this panel could grant today, what one wish would you ask for?
I think his wish might be for better bandwidth. I'm not sure.
Let's make sure. Kandee, if you're on, please speak up, and then we'll close if you're not there. I think it would be for better bandwidth. So, Elisa, you get to make the wish. What's the one wish you would have?
Well, I'd like to echo what he said, which was so powerful, which is that we've got to pull this off. We've got to pull this off for everybody. And you know, the whole southern half of the planet and many in the northern half didn't cause the problem and are paying the highest price. And that there's a massive justice aspect that has to be righted while we are making sure that we all don't burn together. So we've got to do this for everybody. So I'll just reiterate what he said. I thought he had very powerful words.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, panel. Excellent job. And thanks for everybody who participated. We sorry couldn't get all the questions, but great job. We'll sign off. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Good night.
Amazing conversation. So Chad, Elisa, Bob, Rogerio, Ibrahim, and Kandee, thank you so much. The way I hear you, I think I would summarize in three things. We have many of the ingredients. We need to learn how to cook them together to come into a system solution. We were never so close as we are, in spite of all the challenges. So very promising, I think very optimistic. We are ending our first day. This is the GFCC Global Innovation Summit, and it will be continued tomorrow. So I want to invite you to join us tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Before we go, let me share a bit about what will happen tomorrow, but also invite you to reflect, to share on social media, to share on the chat here, now, or tomorrow, your impressions, ideas, comments, and maybe ideas for some actionables coming out of this whole conversation and the summit that we're having. But for tomorrow, we're having in the morning 2 different conversations. We will talk about Africa, and it was very important to hear what Kandee has said, and also to hear other comments here. So we're having a special session on Africa Spotlight Future Markets tomorrow. We are also having a special conversation on the future, looking ahead, and you will learn what we will do and where we will be on the ground in 2022 for the GFCC Global Innovation Summit. Before we go, please don't remind to download the 2 reports that we have shared, we have launched today. You can go to the lower right side of your screen, click there, the link will take you to the GFCC website. And also, we heard, and Ibrahim just commented about some carbon capturing technologies. In 2 different occasions at least, as Deborah said in the beginning of the day, today, we feature young entrepreneurs who are building companies that are taking to the market new technologies to capture and reuse carbon. Actually, we are wasting carbon. We are discarding carbon that we could use. On August 11th, we had the Frame the Future conversation on infrastructure. On October the 6th, we talked natural resources. In both occasions, we had young entrepreneurs who are building the companies that are capturing carbon and that will help us to address this massive challenge, but also to create future value. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope to see you all tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eastern Time.